The Missing Will, Hercule Poirot Solves an Extraordinary Case, by Agatha Christie. The problem presented to us by Miss Violet Marsh made a rather pleasant change from our usual routine work. Poirot had received a brisk and businesslike note from the lady asking for an appointment, and he had replied, asking her to call upon him at 11 o'clock the following day. She arrived punctually, a tall, handsome young woman, plainly but neatly dressed, with an assured and businesslike manner. Clearly, a young woman who meant to get on in the world. I am not a great admirer of the so-called new woman myself, and in spite of her good looks, I was not particularly prepossessed in her favour. My business is of a somewhat unusual nature, M. Poirot, she began after she had accepted a chair. I had better begin at the beginning and tell you the whole story. If you please, mademoiselle, I am an orphan. My father was one of 2 brothers, sons of a small yeoman farmer in Devonshire. The farm was a poor one, and the eldest brother, Andrew, emigrated to Australia, where he did very well indeed, and by means of successful speculation in land, became a very rich man. The younger brother, Roger, my father, had no leanings toward the agricultural life. He managed to educate himself a little, and obtained a post as a clerk in a small firm. He married slightly above him. My mother was the daughter of a poor artist. My father died when I was 6 years old. When I was 14, my mother followed him to the grave. My only living relation then was my Uncle Andrew, who had recently returned from Australia and bought a small place in his native county, Crabtree Manor. He was exceedingly kind to his brother's orphan child, took me to live with him, and treated me in every way as though I were his own daughter. Crabtree Manor, she pursued in spite of its name, is really only an old farmhouse. Farming was in my uncle's blood, and he was intensely interested in various modern farming experiments. Although kindness itself to me, he had certain peculiar and deeply rooted ideas as to the upbringing of women. Himself a man of little or no education, though possessing remarkable shrewdness, he placed little value on what he called book knowledge. He was especially opposed to the education of women. In his opinion, girls should learn practical housework and dairy work, be useful about the home, and have as little to do with book learning as possible. He proposed to bring me up on these lines, to my bitter disappointment. I rebelled frankly. I knew that I possessed a good brain and had absolutely no talent for domestic duties. My uncle and I had many bitter arguments on the subject, for though much attached to each other, we were both self-willed. I was lucky enough to win a scholarship, and up to a certain point was successful in getting my own way. The crisis arose when I resolved to go to Girton. I had a little money of my own, left me by my mother, and I was quite determined to make the best use of the gifts God had given me. I had one long final argument with my uncle. He put the facts plainly before me. He had no other relations, and he had intended me to be his sole heiress. As I have told you, he was a very rich man. If I persisted in these newfangled notions of mine, however, I need look for nothing from him. I remained polite, but firm. I should always be deeply attached to him, but I must lead my own life. We parted on that note. You fancy your brains, my girl, were his last words. I've no book learning, but for all that, I'll pit mine against yours any day. We'll see what we shall see. That was 9 years ago. I have stayed with him for a weekend occasionally, and our relations were perfectly amicable, though his views remained unaltered. He never referred to my having matriculated, nor to my B.Sc. For the last 3 years, his health has been failing, and a month ago he died. I am now coming to the point of my visit. My uncle left a most extraordinary will. By its terms, Crabtree Manor and its contents are to be at my disposal for a year from his death. during which time my clever niece may prove her wits. The actual words run. At the end of that period, my wits having proved better than hers, the house and all my uncle's large fortune passed to various charitable institutions. "That is a little hard on you, mademoiselle," commented Poirot, "seeing that you were Mr. Marsh's only blood relation. I do not look on it in that way. Uncle Andrew warned me fairly, and I chose my own path. Since I would not fall in with his wishes, he was at perfect liberty to leave his money to whom he pleased. Was the will drawn up by a lawyer? No. It was written on a printed will form and witnessed by the man and his wife, who lived in the house and looked after my uncle. There might be a possibility of upsetting such a will. I would not even attempt to do such a thing. You regard it, then, as a sporting challenge on the part of your uncle? That is exactly how I look upon it." "It bears that interpretation, certainly," said Poirot thoughtfully. "Somewhere in this rambling old manor house your uncle has concealed either a sum of money in notes or possibly a second will, and has given you a year in which to exercise your ingenuity to find it." "Exactly, Mem Poirot, and I am paying you the compliment of assuming that your ingenuity will be greater than mine." But that is very charming of you. My grey cells are at your disposal. You have made no search yourself, only a cursory one, but I have too much respect for my uncle's undoubted abilities to fancy that the task would be an easy one. Have you the will, or a copy of it, with you?" Miss Marsh handed a document across the table. Poirot ran through it, nodding to himself. "Made 3 years ago, dated March 25, and the time is given also, 11 a.m. That is very suggestive. It narrows the field of search. Assuredly it is another will we have to seek for. A will made even half an hour later would upset this. Yes, mademoiselle, it is a problem charming and ingenious that you have presented to me here. I shall have all the pleasure in the world in solving it for you. Granted that your uncle was a man of ability, his grey cells cannot have been of the quality of Hercule Poirot. Really, Poirot's vanity is blatant. Fortunately, I have nothing of moment on hand at the minute. Hastings and I will go down to Crabtree Manor tonight. The man and wife who attended on your uncle are still there, I presume?" "Yes, their name is Baker. The following morning saw us started on the hunt proper. We had arrived late the night before. Mr. and Mrs. Baker, having received a telegram from Miss Marsh, were expecting us. They were a pleasant couple, the man gnarled and pink-cheeked like a shriveled pippin, and his wife a woman of vast proportions and true Devonshire calm. Tired with our journey, including an 8-mile drive from the station, we had retired at once to bed after a supper of roast chicken, apple pie, and Devonshire cream. We had now disposed of an excellent breakfast, and were sitting in a small panelled room which had been the late Mr. Marsh's study and living room. A roll-top desk stuffed with papers, all neatly docketed, stood against the wall, and a big leather armchair showed plainly that it had been its owner's constant resting place. A big, chintz-covered settee ran along the opposite wall, and the deep low window seats were covered with the same faded chintz of an old-fashioned pattern. "Eh bien, mon ami," said Poirot, lighting one of his tiny cigarettes, "we must map out our plan of campaign. Already I have made a rough survey of the house, but I am of opinion that any clue will be found in this room. We shall have to go through the documents in the desk with meticulous care. Naturally, I do not expect to find the will among them, but it is likely that some apparently innocent paper may conceal the clue to its hiding place. But first, we must have a little information. Ring the bell, I pray of you." I did so. While we were waiting for it to be answered, Poirot walked up and down, looking about him approvingly. A man of method, this Mr. Marsh. See how neatly the packets of papers are docketed, and the key to each drawer has its ivory label. So has the key of the china cabinet on the wall. And see with what precision the china within is arranged. It rejoices the heart. Nothing here offends the eye." He came to an abrupt pause, as his eye was caught by the key of the desk itself, to which a dirty envelope was affixed. Poirot frowned at it, and withdrew it from the lock. On it were scrawled the words, "Key of roll-top desk," in a crabbed handwriting quite unlike the neat superscriptures on the other keys. "An alien note," said Poirot, frowning. "I could swear that here we have no longer the personality of Mr. Marsh. But who else has been in the house? Only Miss Marsh. And she, if I mistake not, is also a young lady of method and order. Baker came in answer to the bell. Will you fetch Madame your wife, and answer a few questions?" Baker departed, and in a few moments returned with Mrs. Baker, wiping her hands on her apron and beaming all over her face. In a few clear words, Poirot set forth the object of his mission. The Bakers were immediately sympathetic. "Us don't want to see Miss Violet done out of what's hers," declared the woman. "Cruel hard 'twould be for hospitals to get it all." Poirot proceeded with his questions. Yes, Mr. and Mrs. Baker remembered perfectly witnessing the will. Baker had previously been sent into the neighbouring town to get 2 printed will forms. "2? Said Poirot sharply. "Yes, sir, for safety like, I suppose, in case he should spoil one." And sure enough, so he did do. Us had signed one. "What time of day was that?" Baker scratched his head, but his wife was quicker. "Why, to be sure, I just put the milk on for the cocoa at 11. Don't you remember? It had all boiled over on the stove when us got back to kitchen. And afterward, 'twould be about an hour later. Us had to go in again. 'I've made a mistake,' says old master. Had to tear the whole thing up. I'll trouble you to sign again. And us did. And afterward master give us a tidy sum of money each. 'I've left you nothing in my will,' says he. 'But each year I live, you'll have this to be a nest egg when I'm gone.' And sure enough, so he did." Poirot reflected. "After you had signed the second time, what did Mr. Marsh do? Do you know?" "Went out to the village to pay tradesmen's books. That did not seem very promising." Poirot tried another tack. He held out the key of the desk. "Is that your master's writing?" I may have imagined it, but I fancied that a moment or two elapsed before Baker replied, "Yes, sir, it is. He's lying, I thought. But why? Has your master let the house? Have there been any strangers in it during the last 3 years?" "No, sir." "No visitors? Only Miss Violet? No strangers of any kind been inside this room?" "No, sir." "You forget the workman, Jim," his wife reminded him. "Workman?" Poirot wheeled round on her. "What workman?" The woman explained that about 2.5 years ago, workmen had been in the house to do certain repairs. She was quite vague as to what the repairs were. Her view seemed to be that the whole thing was a fad of her master's, and quite unnecessary. Part of the time the workmen had been in the study, but what they had done there she could not say, as her master had not let either of them into the room while the work was in progress. Unfortunately, they could not remember the name of the firm employed, beyond the fact that it was a Plymouth one. "We progress, Hastings," said Poirot, rubbing his hands as the Bakers left the room. "Clearly, he made a second will, and then had workmen from Plymouth End to make a suitable hiding place. Instead of wasting time, taking up the floor and tapping the walls, we will go to Plymouth." With a little trouble we were able to get the information we wanted, and after 1 or 2 essays, we found the firm employed by Mr. Marsh. Their employees had all been with them many years, and it was easy to find the 2 men who had worked under Mr. Marsh's orders. They remembered the job perfectly. Among various other minor jobs, they had taken up one of the bricks of the old-fashioned fireplace, made a cavity beneath, and so cut the brick that it was impossible to see the joint. By pressing on the second brick from the end, the whole thing was raised. It had been quite a complicated piece of work, and the old gentleman had been very fussy about it. Our informant was a man called Gorgon, a big, gaunt man with a grizzled moustache. He seemed an intelligent fellow. We returned to Crabtree Manor in high spirits, and locking the study door, proceeded to put our newly acquired knowledge into effect. It was impossible to see any sign on the bricks, but when we pressed in the manner indicated, a deep cavity was at once disclosed. Eagerly Poirot plunged in his hand. Suddenly his face fell from complacent elation to consternation. All he held was a charred fragment of stiff paper. But for it, the cavity was empty. "Secret!" cried Poirot angrily. "Someone has been here before us." We examined the scrap of paper anxiously. Clearly, it was a fragment of what we sought. A portion of Baker's signature remained, but no indication of what the terms of the will had been. Poirot sat back on his heels. "I understand it not," he growled. "Who destroyed this? And what was their object?" "The Bakers," I suggested. "Pourquoi?" "Neither will make any provision for them, and they are more likely to be kept on with Miss Marsh than if the place became the property of a hospital. How could it be to anyone's advantage to destroy the will? The hospital's benefit, yes, but one cannot suspect institutions. Perhaps the old man changed his mind and destroyed it himself," I suggested. Poirot rose to his feet, dusting his knees with his usual care. "That may be," he admitted. "One of your more sensible observations, Hastings. Well, we can do no more here. We have done all that mortal man can do. We have successfully pitted our wits against the late Andrew Marsh, but unfortunately his niece is no better off for our success. By driving to the station at once, we were just able to catch a train to London, though not the principal express." Poirot was sad and dissatisfied. For my part, I was tired and dozed in a corner. Suddenly, as we were just moving out of Taunton, Poirot uttered a piercing squeal. "Vite, Hastings! Awake and jump! But jump, I say!" Before I knew where I was, we were standing on the platform, bareheaded and minus our valises, while the train disappeared into the night. I was furious, but Poirot paid no attention. "Imbecile that I have been!" he cried. "Triple imbecile! Not again will I vaunt my little grey cells." "That's a good job, at any rate," I said grumpily. "But what is this all about?" As usual, when following out his own ideas, he paid absolutely no attention to me. "The tradesmen's books. I have left them entirely out of account." "Yes, but where?" "Where? Never mind. I cannot be mistaken. We must return at once." Easier said than done. We managed to get a slow train to Exeter, and there Poirot hired a car. We arrived back at Crabtree Manor in the small hours of the morning. I pass over the bewilderment of the Bakers when we had at last aroused them. Paying no attention to anybody, Poirot strode at once to the study. "I have been not a triple imbecile, but 36 times 1, my friend," he deigned to remark. "Now behold." Going straight to the desk, he drew out the key and detached the envelope from it. I stared at him stupidly. How could he possibly hope to find a big will form in that tiny envelope? With great care he cut open the envelope, laying it out flat. Then he lighted the fire and held the plain, inside surface of the envelope to the flame. In a few minutes, faint characters began to appear. "Look!" cried Poirot in triumph. I looked. There were just a few lines of faint writing, stating briefly that he left everything to his niece Violet Marsh. It was dated March 25, 12:30 p.m. And witnessed by Albert Pike, confectioner, and Jessie Pike, married woman. H.A. But is it legal? I gasped. As far as I know, there is no law against writing your will in a blend of disappearing and sympathetic ink. The intention of the testator is clear, and the beneficiary is his only living relation. But the cleverness of him! He foresaw every step that a searcher would take, that I, miserable imbecile, took. He gets 2 will forms, makes the servant sign twice, then sallies out with his will written on the inside of a dirty envelope, and a fountain pen containing his little ink mixture. On some excuse, he gets the confectioner and his wife to sign their names under his own signature. Then he ties it to the key of his desk and chuckles to himself. If his niece sees through his little ruse, she will have justified her choice of life, an elaborate education, and be thoroughly welcome to his money. She didn't see through it, did she? I said slowly. It seems rather unfair. The old man really won. But no, Hastings. It is your wits that go astray. Miss Marsh proved the astuteness of her wits and the value of the higher education for women by at once putting the matter in my hands. Always employ the expert. She has amply proved her right to the money. I very much wonder what old Andrew Marsh would have thought.
A Dill Pickle by Katherine Mansfield. And then, after 6 years, she saw him again. He was seated at one of those little bamboo tables, decorated with a Japanese vase of paper daffodils. There was a tall plate of fruit in front of him, and very carefully, in a way she recognized immediately as his special way, he was peeling an orange. He must have felt the shock of recognition in her, for he looked up and met her eyes. Incredible! He didn't know her. She smiled. He frowned. She came towards him. He closed his eyes an instant, but opening them, his face lit up as though he had struck a match in a dark room. He laid down the orange and pushed back his chair, and she took her little warm hand out of her muff and gave it to him.
"Vera!"
he exclaimed.
"How strange! Really, for a moment, I didn't know you. Won't you sit down? You've had lunch. Won't you have some coffee?"
She hesitated, but of course she meant to.
Yes, I'd like some coffee.
And she sat down opposite him.
"You've changed. You've changed very much,"
he said, staring at her with that eager, lighted look.
"You look so well. I've never seen you look so well before."
Really?
She raised her veil and unbuttoned her high fur collar.
I don't feel very well. Can't bear this weather, you know.
"Oh, no. You hate the cold."
Loathe it.
She shuddered.
And the worst of it is that the older one grows...
He interrupted her.
"Excuse me,"
and tapped on the table for the waitress.
"Please bring some coffee and cream."
To her.
"You are sure you won't eat anything? Some fruit, perhaps. The fruit here is very good."
No thanks. Nothing.
"Then that's settled."
And smiling just a hint too broadly, he took up the orange again.
"You were saying the older one grows?"
The colder.
She laughed. But she was thinking how well she remembered that trick of his, the trick of interrupting her, and of how it used to exasperate her 6 years ago. She used to feel then as though he, quite suddenly, in the middle of what she was saying, put his hand over her lips, turned from her, attended to something different, and then took his hand away, and with just the same slightly too broad smile, gave her his attention again. Now we are ready. That is settled.
"The colder."
He echoed her words, laughing too.
"Ha ha! You still say the same things. And there is another thing about you that has not changed at all. Your beautiful voice. Your beautiful way of speaking."
Now he was very grave. He leaned towards her, and she smelled the warm, stinging scent of the orange peel.
"You have only to say one word, and I would know your voice among all other voices. I don't know what it is. I've often wondered. What makes your voice such a haunting memory? Do you remember that first afternoon we spent together at Kew Gardens? You were so surprised because I did not know the names of any flowers. I am still just as ignorant for all your telling me. But whenever it is very fine and warm, and I see some bright colors, it's awfully strange, I hear your voice saying,
Geranium, marigold, and verbena.
and I feel those 3 words are all I recall of some forgotten heavenly language. You remember that afternoon?
Oh, yes, very well.
She drew a long, soft breath, as though the paper daffodils between them were almost too sweet to bear. Yet what had remained in her mind of that particular afternoon was an absurd scene over the tea-table, a great many people taking tea in a Chinese pagoda, and he behaving like a maniac about the wasps, waving them away, flapping at them with his straw hat, serious and infuriated out of all proportion to the occasion. How delighted the sniggering tea-drinkers had been, and how she had suffered! But now, as he spoke, that memory faded. His was the truer. Yes, it had been a wonderful afternoon, full of geranium and marigold and verbena, and warm sunshine. Her thoughts lingered over the last 2 words as though she sang them. In the warmth, as it were, another memory unfolded. She saw herself sitting on a lawn. He lay beside her, and suddenly, after a long silence, he rolled over and put his head in her lap.
I wish
He said in a low, troubled voice.
I wish I had taken poison and were about to die. Here, now.
At that moment a little girl in a white dress, holding a long, dripping water lily, dodged from behind a bush, stared at them, and dodged back again. But he did not see. She leaned over him.
Oh, why do you say that? I could not say that.
But he gave a kind of soft moan, and taking her hand, he held it to his cheek.
Because I know I am going to love you too much, far too much. And I shall suffer so terribly, Vera, because you never, never will love me.
He was certainly far better looking now than he had been then. He had lost all that dreamy vagueness and indecision. Now he had the air of a man who has found his place in life, and fills it with a confidence and an assurance which was, to say the least, impressive. He must have made money, too. His clothes were admirable, and at that moment he pulled a Russian cigarette case out of his pocket.
Won't you smoke?
Yes, I will.
She hovered over them.
They look very good.
I think they are. I got them made for me by a little man in St. James Street. I don't smoke very much. I'm not like you. But when I do, they must be delicious, very fresh cigarettes. Smoking isn't a habit with me. It's a luxury, like perfume. Are you still so fond of perfumes? Ah, when I was in Russia.
She broke in.
You've really been to Russia?
Oh, yes. I was there for over a year. Have you forgotten how we used to talk of going there?
No, I've not forgotten.
He gave a strange half laugh and leaned back in his chair.
Isn't it curious? I have really carried out all those journeys that we planned. Yes, I have been to all those places that we talked of, and stayed in them long enough to, as you used to say, air oneself in them. In fact, I have spent the last 3 years of my life traveling all the time. Spain, Corsica, Siberia, Russia, Egypt. The only country left is China, and I mean to go there too, when the war is over.
As he spoke, so lightly, tapping the end of his cigarette against the ashtray, she felt the strange beast that had slumbered so long within her bosom stir, stretch itself, yawn, pick up its ears, and suddenly bound to its feet, and fix its longing, hungry stare upon those far-away places. But all she said was, smiling gently,
How I envy you.
he accepted that.
It has been,
He said,
very wonderful, especially Russia. Russia was all that we had imagined, and far, far more. I even spent some days on a river boat on the Volga. Do you remember that boatman's song that you used to play?
Yes.
It began to play in her mind as she spoke.
Do you ever play it now?
No, I have no piano.
He was amazed at that.
But what has become of your beautiful piano?
She made a little grimace.
Sold. Ages ago.
But you were so fond of music.
He wondered.
I have no time for it now,
Said she. He let it go at that.
That river life,
He went on.
is something quite special. After a day or two you cannot realize that you have ever known another. And it is not necessary to know the language. The life of the boat creates a bond between you and the people that's more than sufficient. You eat with them, pass the day with them, and in the evening there is that endless singing.
She shivered, hearing the boatman's song break out again, loud and tragic, and seeing the boat floating on the darkening river, with melancholy trees on either side.
Yes, I should like that,
Said she, stroking her muff.
You'd like almost everything about Russian life.
He said warmly.
It's so informal, so impulsive, so free without question. And then the peasants are so splendid. They are such human beings. Yes, that is it. Even the man who drives your carriage has some real part in what is happening. I remember the evening a party of us, 2 friends of mine and the wife of one of them, went for a picnic by the Black Sea. We took supper and champagne, and ate and drank on the grass. And while we were eating, the coachman came up. "Have a dill pickle," he said. He wanted to share with us. That seemed to me so right, so you know what I mean.
And she seemed at that moment to be sitting on the grass beside the mysteriously black sea, black as velvet, and rippling against the banks in silent velvet waves. She saw the carriage drawn up to one side of the road, and the little group on the grass, their faces and hands white in the moonlight. She saw the pale dress of the woman outspread, and her folded parasol lying on the grass like a huge pearl crochet hook. Apart from them, with his supper in a cloth on his knees, sat the coachman. "Have a dill pickle," said he, and although she was not certain what a dill pickle was, she saw the greenish glass jar with a red chili like a parrot's beak glimmering through. She sucked in her cheek. The dill pickle was terribly sour.
Yes, I know perfectly what you mean,
She said. In the pause that followed, they looked at each other. In the past, when they had looked at each other like that, they had felt such a boundless understanding between them, that their souls had, as it were, put their arms round each other, and dropped into the same sea, content to be drowned, like mournful lovers. But now the surprising thing was that it was he who held back, he who said,
What a marvelous listener you are. When you look at me with those wild eyes, I feel that I could tell you things that I would never breathe to another human being.
Was there just a hint of mockery in his voice, or was it her fancy? She could not be sure.
Before I met you,
He said,
I have never spoken of myself to anybody. How well I remember one night, the night that I brought you the little Christmas tree, telling you all about my childhood, and of how I was so miserable that I had run away and lived under a cart in our yard for 2 days without being discovered. And you listened, and your eyes shone, and I felt that you had even made the little Christmas tree listen too, as in a fairy story.
But of that evening she had remembered a little pot of caviar. It had cost 7 and 6pence. He could not get over it. Think of it, a tiny jar like that costing 7 and 6pence. While she ate it, he watched her, delighted and shocked.
No, really, that is eating money. You could not get 7 shillings into a little pot that size. Only think of the profit they must make.
And he had begun some immensely complicated calculations. But now good-bye to the caviar. The Christmas tree was on the table, and the little boy lay under the cart with his head pillowed on the yard dog.
The dog was called Bosun.
she cried delightedly, but he did not follow.
Which dog? Had you a dog? I don't remember a dog at all.
No, no, I mean the yard dog when you were a little boy.
He laughed and snapped the cigarette case too.
Was he? Do you know, I had forgotten that. It seems such ages ago. I cannot believe that it is only 6 years. After I had recognized you today, I had to take such a leap. I had to take a leap over my whole life to get back to that time. I was such a kid then.
He drummed on the table.
I've often thought how I must have bored you. And now I understand so perfectly why you wrote to me as you did, although at the time that letter nearly finished my life. I found it the other day, and I couldn't help laughing as I read it. It was so clever, such a true picture of me.
He glanced up.
You're not going?
She had buttoned her collar again and drawn down her veil.
Yes, I am afraid I must,
she said, and managed a smile. Now she knew that he had been mocking.
Ah, no, please.
He pleaded.
Don't go, just for a moment.
And he caught up one of her gloves from the table and clutched at it as if that would hold her.
I see so few people to talk to nowadays that I have turned into a sort of barbarian,
he said.
Have I said something to hurt you?
Not a bit,
she lied. But as she watched him draw her glove through his fingers gently, her anger really did die down. And besides, at the moment he looked more like himself of 6 years ago.
What I really wanted then,
he said softly,
was to be a sort of carpet, to make myself into a sort of carpet for you to walk on so that you need not be hurt by the sharp stones and the mud that you hated so. It was nothing more positive than that, nothing more selfish. Only I did desire, eventually, to turn into a magic carpet and carry you away to all those lands you long to see.
As she spoke, she lifted her head as though she drank something. The strange beast in her bosom began to purr.
I felt that you were more lonely than anybody else in the world,
he went on.
And yet, perhaps, that you were the only person in the world who was really, truly alive. Born out of your time,
he murmured, stroking the glove.
Fated.
Ah, God, what had she done? How had she dared to throw away her happiness like this? This was the only man who had ever understood her. Was it too late? Could it be too late? She was that glove that he held in his fingers.
And then the fact that you had no friends, and never had made friends with people. How I understood that, for neither had I. Is it just the same now?
Yes,
she breathed.
Just the same. I am as alone as ever.
So am I.
He laughed gently.
Just the same.
Suddenly, with a quick gesture, he handed her back the glove and scraped his chair on the floor.
But what seemed to me so mysterious then is perfectly plain to me now. And to you too, of course. It was simply that we were such egoists, so self-engrossed, so wrapped up in ourselves that we hadn't a corner in our hearts for anybody else. Do you know,
he cried, naive and hearty, and dreadfully like another side of that old self again.
I began studying a mind system when I was in Russia, and I found that we were not peculiar at all. It's quite a well-known form of...
She had gone. He sat there, thunderstruck, astounded beyond words. And then he asked the waitress for his bill.
But the cream has not been touched,
he said.
Please do not charge me for it.
End of A Dill Pickle.